Iskon Bhakti Acharya Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Gaura Premanandi, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So today we're starting a new chapter in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, chapter 23, Maharaj Prithu's going back home. And we have 3 verses, and we have the first one on the board. So we can recite the first one, and then I can read the second and third one. Maitreya Vacha
Maitreya Vacha
Trishtvatmanam pravayasam Drishtvatmanam pravayasam Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Maitreya Vacha.
Maitreya Vacha.
Drishtvatmanam Pravai Yasam.
Drishvatmanam Pravayasam.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Atmanavartita Shesha.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Please chant.
Maitreya Vacha.
Maitreya Vacha.
Drishvatmanam Pravayasam.
Drishvatmanam Pravayasam.
Ekada Vainya Atmavan.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Drishvatmanam Pravayasam.
Drishvatmanam Pravayasam.
Ekada Vainya Atmavan.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Maitreya Vacha.
Maitreya Vacha.
Drishvatmanam Pravayasam.
Drishvatmanam Pravayasam.
Ekada Vainya Atmavan.
Ekada Vainyatmavan.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Atmanavardita Shesha.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Svanusarga Prajapati.
Okay, then I will just read. This will take all a little time, but I will read text 2 and 3 also, and then we can do the word for word and the rest. Jagatasta tastushas chapi vrittido dharma vritsatam nishpaditeshvara desho yadartam yagivan atma yechesh atmajamyasya virahadrudatimiva prajasu vimanaseka sadarugatapovanam. Maitreya Vacha.
Maitreya Vacha.
The great sage, the sage Maitreya continued to speak.
The sage Maitreya continued to speak.
Drishtva,
Drishva.
after seeing him.
After seeing him.
Atmanam,
Atmanam.
of the body.
Of the body.
Pravayasam,
Pravayasam.
old age.
Old age.
Ekada,
Ekada.
once upon a time.
Once upon a time.
Vainyaha,
Vainyaha.
King Prithu.
King Prithu.
Atmavan,
Atmavan.
fully conversant in spiritual education.
Fully conversant in spiritual education.
Atmana,
Atmana.
by oneself.
By oneself.
Vardita,
Vardita.
increased.
Increased.
Ashesha,
Ashesha.
unlimitedly.
Unlimitedly.
Sva anusargaha,
Svanusarga.
creation of material opulences.
Creation of material opulences.
Prajapati,
Prajapati.
a protector of citizens.
A protector of citizens.
Jagataha,
Jagata.
moving.
Moving.
Tastushaha,
Tastushaha.
not moving.
Not moving.
Cha,
Cha.
Also.
Also.
Api.
Api.
Certainly.
Certainly.
Vrittidaha.
Vrittidaha.
One who gives pensions.
One who gives pensions.
Dharmavrit.
Dharmavrit.
One who observes the religious principles.
One who observes the religious principles.
Satam.
Satam.
Of the devotees.
Of the devotees.
Nishpadita.
Nishpadita.
Fully executed.
Fully executed.
Ishvara.
Ishvara.
Of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Adeshaha.
Adeshaha.
Order.
Order.
Yat Artam.
Yat Artam.
In coordination with Him.
In coordination with Him.
Iha.
Iha.
In this world.
In this world.
Yagivan.
Yagivan.
I don't know how this is pronounced correctly. Performed. Atmajeshu.
Atmajeshu.
Unto His sons.
Unto His sons.
Atmajam.
Atmajam.
The earth.
The earth.
Nyasya.
Nyasya.
Indicating.
Indicating.
Virahat.
Viraha.
Out of separation.
Out of separation.
Rudatimiva.
Rudavimiva.
Just like lamenting.
Just like lamenting.
Brajasu.
Prajasu.
Unto the citizens.
Unto the citizens.
Vimanasu.
Vimanasu.
Unto the aggrieved.
Unto the aggrieved.
Ekaha.
Ekaha.
Alone.
Alone.
Sadaraha.
Sadaraha.
With his wife.
With his wife.
Agat.
Agat.
Went.
Went.
Tapavanam.
Tapavanam.
In the forest where one can execute austerities.
In the forest where one can execute his austerities.
Translation. At the last stage of his life, when Maharaj Prithu saw himself getting old, that great soul, who was king of the world, divided whatever opulence he had accumulated amongst all kinds of living entities, moving and non-moving. Can somebody close the door? Oh my God, I get agitated when I see. He arranged pensions for everyone according to religious principles. And after executing the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in complete coordination with Him, he dedicated his sons unto the earth, which was considered to be his daughter. Then Maharaj Prithu left the presence of his citizens, who were almost lamenting and crying from feeling separation from the king, and went to the forest alone with his wife to perform austerities. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj Prithu was one of the Shakti-Avesh incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as such, he appeared on the surface of the earth to execute the orders of the Supreme. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of all planets, and he is always anxious to see that in each and every planet the living entities are happily living and executing their duties. As soon as there is some discrepancy in the execution of duties, the Lord appears on earth, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 4:7. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. Since there were so many discrepancies during the reign of King Vena, the Lord sent his most confidential devotee, Maharaj Prithu, to settle things. Therefore, after executing the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and settling the affairs of the world, Maharaj Prithu was ready to retire. He had been exemplary in his governmental administration, and now he was to become exemplary in his retirement. He divided all his property amongst his sons and appointed them to rule the world, and then he went to the forest with his wife. It is significant in this connection that it is said that Maharaj Prithu retired alone, and at the same time he took his wife with him. According to Vedic principles, when retiring from family life, one can take his wife with him, for the husband and wife are considered to be one unit. Thus they can both combinedly perform austerities for liberation. This is the path that Maharaj Prithu, who was an exemplary character, followed, and this is also the way of Vedic civilization. One should not simply remain at home until the time of death, but should separate from family life at a timely moment and prepare himself to go back to Godhead. As a Shakti-Avesh incarnation of God, who had actually come from Vaikuntha as a representative of Krishna, Maharaj Prithu was certain to go back to Godhead. Nonetheless, in order to set the example in our ways, he also underwent severe austerities in the Tapovan. It appears that in those days there were many Tapovans, or forests especially meant for retirement and the practice of austerities. Indeed, it was compulsory for everyone to go to the Tapovan, to fully accept the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For it is very difficult to retire from family life and at the same time remain at home. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavanscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Shakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. At the last stage of his life, I will now not read all the Sanskrit verses, otherwise it will take a lot of time. At the last stage of his life, when Maharaj Prithu saw himself getting old, that great soul who was king of the world divided whatever opulence he had, accumulated amongst all kinds of living entities, moving and non-moving. He arranged pensions for everyone according to religious principles, and after executing the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in complete coordination with him, he dedicated his sons onto the earth, which was considered to be his daughter. Then Maharaj Prithu left the presence of his citizens, who were almost lamenting and crying from feeling separation from the king, and went to the forest alone with his wife to perform austerities. Hare Krishna. So thank you for coming to the Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we're starting a new chapter, and this chapter, as mentioned in the beginning, is entitled Maharaj Prithu Going Back Home. I was wondering if Prabhupada, he chose the title, and he started a magazine in his very early days of preaching, and he called it Back Home, Back to Godhead. And this is like the vision statement of Prabhupada's contribution in the mission of Lord Chaitanya. That going back home, going back to Godhead. So now in this chapter, he's entitling it Maharaj Prithu going back home. I was wondering how did other acharyas call this chapter, because Prabhupada, we know that he very particularly chose his words to make a point. So here we are at a place in Bhagavatam which is actually something, it's not something that's happening only once, but yesterday I skimmed through the Bhagavatam a bit, and it happens a few times when somebody is leaving for the forest. Does anyone remember somebody?
Dhruva Maharaj.
Dhruva Maharaj? Dhritarashtra? Okay. Ramachandra, yes.
Rishabdev, Bharat,
Rishabdev, Bharat, Priyavrata, the Pandavas, of course. Actually, the whole Bhagavatam is based on somebody retiring and, so to say, going to the forest. Parikshit Maharaj. Kardama Muni also, after he enjoyed family life with Devahuti, then he left home. So this is a very common theme, it seems, and Prabhupada in the purport he describes that this is a common in Vedic culture, that actually one has to retire at the end of his life and go to the forest. For what reason? Why does somebody go to the forest?
Tapasya.
Tapasya. To
Detach.
right. To detach himself from the material world. So it seems that this is something relevant to all of us, if it's mentioned so many times in Bhagavatam, and if these great personalities show it, then it's certainly relevant. And Prabhupada describes in the purport that actually he didn't have to do that. He is a Shakti Avesha avatar, completely pure soul, and we just read through the whole pastime of Prithu Maharaj. He was so exalted, but still he went. And why is that? Yat yat achariti Krishnas. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that whatever a great man performs, the whole world will pursue it. So the great devotees, they will do everything in their life to set an example. So like all the other kings we hear in Bhagavatam, they also very, very exalted, but still they went to the forest to show to us conditioned living entities that you're supposed to do this in order to attain the goal. And what is the goal?
love of God.
Yes, Krishna Prem. And what can you do with Krishna Prem? Go back home to Godhead. So today I thought we can a little bit speak about this very favorite topic of many, Varnashram Dharma. I know it's a controversial topic, but I thought let us listen to Prabhupada and maybe we can try to understand a little bit better what it means, how Varnashram Dharma can be implemented and applied. First, I wanted to just explain a little bit more about why this Vanaprastha ashram is very essential. And we heard it's for the reason of detaching ourselves, to take austerity. So if we know that the goal is to go back home, back to Godhead, we have to know what is the condition that we can go. And Krishna he describes that in Bhagavad Gita, no? Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam. That whatever somebody remembers at the time of death, that's what he will attain. It's a very scientific process of reincarnation, or not reincarnation, going to the spiritual world. And if I want to go back home, back to Godhead, and Krishna is the center of the spiritual world, then naturally I have to remember Krishna at the time of death. Very simple understanding. So the Vanaprastha ashram comes after the Grihastha ashram. And the Grihastha ashram, we learn from the scriptures, is a very entangling ashram. Why is that? Why is the Grihastha ashram entangling the conditioned living entity?
Prabhupada calls it extended selfishness. That you will, this me, my, mind concept is more profound. Like you get attached, and then you also think you are the Lord and Master.
So basically it reinforces the bodily concept of life and also extended bodily concept, everything that belongs to the body. Yeah, that's the difficulty in the Grihastha ashram. It actually, because there's a lot of sense involvement, sense gratification, it reinforces that consciousness of the living entity, which is actually false, that I am this body. And there are so many sense pleasures that come in family life. You know, from the gross to the subtle, from eating, having sex life, to sleeping in a nice bed, to very subtle things. Like here you can see how Maharaj Prithvi lives, and then it is described how the citizens, you know, they were crying for him when he left. So that is some very subtle thing, that there is some loving relationship you have with King Prithu being the king of the world. He of course has not only 4 or 5 people in his family, but he has basically the whole world who is having a relationship with him. So this is something I also wanted to emphasize, to meditate about this situation. We read the previous chapters and verses, and it was described, Prithu Maharaj, he was ruling the whole world, and it is very specifically described that he ruled the 7 islands, and Prabhupada describes that means the 7 continents. So that is a real position, you know, he's ruling the whole world, and he's so opulent, so powerful, and now he's just living. Could you imagine to do that? Like how difficult that is, to live in such a situation where you are the supreme control of the whole world? I was thinking about myself, and I can certainly say I probably couldn't do it, because as a conditioned living entity I would feel so attached to all these things. And we might have some experience in our personal life, you know, when we, I don't know, we leave a place or we leave a person, we get separated, and then one person cries for us. How difficult that is, you know, we feel so kind of attached to that situation that we can hardly leave it. But King Prithu, basically the whole world was crying for him, but he left it and went to the forest. And what does it actually indicate to us? That we have to come to that point in order to go back home, back to God. Unless we come to that point of complete detachment, we will not be able to go. However, by the mercy of the Vaishnavas, it can be attained. And how did he attain it? By whose mercy? The 4 Kumaras. So when the 4 Kumaras appeared, after Prithu Maharaj gave his speech, then he was glorifying the Kumaras, and then what did he do? He was asking questions. And interestingly, even though he was so exalted, he put himself like as a complete fool and a complete materialistic person. And then the Kumaras gave him the blessings that That's what you do, and that's how you attain the goal. And that's how one gets empowered to do it. It's one way. But of course there is much more. And so when one goes to the Vanaprastha ashram, he has to take this very difficult step of leaving behind his comforts. And we now said we need the blessings of the Vaishnavas to do that. Like in Prithama's case, it was the Kumaras. But there is more to it. If you read through the whole story of Prithu Maharaj, he was going through the Grihastha ashram, and what did he do in the Grihastha ashram? He was performing his duty perfectly. And that is actually a guarantee by Krishna that if you perform your duty in your ashram perfectly, then it will be protected and you can also then move on. Because if you perform your duty perfectly, it's like you have to complete a certain task, and then once you complete the Grihastha ashram, you're complete. You know, you complete, you can move on without any problem. But for this, one has to do it properly. So this is certainly something the devotees have to always remember, that no matter how difficult it is, we should try to perform our duty according to the injunctions. And Prithu Maharaj did that, and then naturally, if you embrace the ashram, the Grihastha ashram in its complete, then Krishna will give you all the realizations that are needed to move on later on. Now there is one thing which is very unfortunate, especially in the West, which is called divorce. And divorce is something which you basically decide not to perform your duty as a Grihastha. And what's the problem with that? You separate from your wife, or you separate from your husband, and you take somebody else. But that means you didn't complete it. You're basically starting with something new. And why does divorce happen? Because difficulties arise. But the difficulties are actually there to give you a certain realization in the end about what Grihastha ashram means, what materialistic life means. And then if you not go through that, if you avoid it, you will not come to the point of actually being realized that I want to give it up. You don't want to give it up. You want to continue with this. So that is one very important thing we see in Prithu Maharaj's story, that he was he was perfectly performing his duties in the Grihastha ashram. But then there is also something else, and that actually shows how important the whole Vedic system of Varnashram is. That is the training. Because without the training in the initial phase of one's life, brahmacharya, one will not appreciate spiritual life. And if one doesn't appreciate, if one doesn't have a taste for spiritual life, then it's very difficult to give up the material life. So this Vedic system of Varnashram Dharma is so scientific, and it's very simple to understand. You know, it's not like a rocket science, but it's very, very simple but scientific. That the first stage is, it will give a training to the jiva to understand, I'm not this body, and actually there is something higher than this material world. And that goes for 20 years, means it's a serious training. And I was also thinking how, in my experience, you know, you can see how a person can learn, you know. You can see some person can learn faster and some are not so fast. And 20 years of learning is a long time. And especially from 5 to 25, that is the best age to learn. Like Ajay Krishna, you know. We are teaching him now a little bit, and I can see how he can learn much better than others. I've maybe taught something because he's younger. Of course, now you're also 18. You're not 5 years anymore, but there's a certain freshness in the mind, you know. So in the Vedic culture, in this perfect system from 5 to 25, this child absorbs so much of this spiritual reality. That's why it's called brahmacharya. That in the ideal case, the child will actually situate itself on the Brahman platform. And then in the usual case, the child will move on to the grihastashram. Because the conditioned living entity, most are not meant to just live a life of renunciation, but they are meant to also enjoy in this world. So, but then they move into the grihastashram with a certain background and training, and then they will also be able to enjoy in a dharmic way. And then when they follow the whole grihastashram, as we explained before, then they can move on to the vanaprasthashram. So this is very, the Varnashram Dharma is very scientific. We have to always, I think, remember that it's not some torture for the living entity. Actually, it's meant to give the highest happiness to the living entity. And it's an illusion to think that we can concoct our own way of living and be happier. It's not possible. The other day I was, after a long time, I was taking a bicycle ride with Nanda Kumar's bike. He mercifully gave me his bicycle. And then I was just riding through the city, and you know, now it's the summertime, holiday. And so I was observing the people sitting in the restaurants, in the bars, and then I saw the shopping malls and the shopping lanes, and how they were sitting at the lake, and just, you know, a lot of enjoyment going on. And I was just thinking, can it actually get any better than this on the gross material plane? I don't think so. You know, we are so advanced. I was thinking, wow, we are so advanced. It's amazing. And in a way we have to say congratulations to us. We are so advanced, but when you look, we are not happy. People are not happy. So that is the problem when the conditioned living entity in ignorance thinks he's more intelligent than God, and he will create his own invention. And yeah, it's true, we are advanced. We are more advanced than the Vedic age. We have cell phones, computers, cars, airplanes, so many things. However, it's not, the problem is it's not bringing substantial happiness. And Bhaktivedanta Purnamurti explains that nicely. I also mentioned in previous classes. Krishna, he created this whole existence for rasa. Now we have the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which explains to us that the spiritual world is meant for rasa, loving exchange. There's no other reason in the spiritual world than loving exchange. It's not about having things or so, but it's about rasa. And Maharaj explains how Krishna, he expands that rasa into the material world. Because the conditioned living entity, he doesn't appreciate the spiritual rasa, so he wants sense gratification. Then he will expand this rasa into sense gratification. That's actually also a rasa. But then there is another rasa in between, and that is the rasa of following dharma. And by following dharma, you will experience some kind of, it's still material, but it's happiness. Like, I find also when you go to India, you can experience this more if you have some loving exchanges with people which are actually really cultured. Then you can feel some rasa coming, some taste. But the problem is, you cannot have full sense gratification and full dharmic rasa, because full sense gratification means you're not following dharma anymore. So that's what we can see in our world, that we have full sense gratification, but people don't have so much rasa anymore. In the relationships, it's very shallow. The rasa is mainly in the relationships is based on gross sense gratification, means having sex. So yeah, the system is also meant to give happiness. Now, we understood how brahmacharya ashram is important for the training, then grihastha ashram is also important to, in order to enjoy this world in a way which is dharmic, and then the vanaprastha ashram is important to detach. And I came across some nice interaction with Bob Cohen and Srila Prabhupada. I would like to read it to you. That is from the Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. So Bob is saying here, he's lamenting, he's saying, what I still have, my connections at home, marriage, is I am engaged. This is like, so Srila Prabhupada said, no, there are so many marriages. He indicates Shyama Sundar. He's married. Marriage is no barrier. I told you that there are 4 different orders of spiritual life: brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. So after brahmachari life one can marry. That is not obligatory. One may remain Naishtika brahmachari for his whole life, but the brahmachari can marry, and after marriage there is vanaprastha life. This means that one is a little aloof from family. The husband and wife live separately. At that time there is no sex life. Then when he is fully renounced, detached from family life, he takes sannyas. And Bob Cohen asks, does somebody forget his wife completely then? Srila Prabhupada said, yes. Forgetting is not very difficult if you try to forget. Out of sight, out of mind. Just as I have my wife, children, grandchildren, everything, but out of sight, out of mind, that's all. Therefore, vanaprastha, sannyas, everything is nicely arranged by the Vedic system. So scientific, no? I mean, who has this experience? Out of sight, out of mind. You have this experience, Krishna Prabhu? Maybe I can see your reaction. I mean, I made so many strong experiences about the mind being agitated by something, but then once somehow the object of agitation is out of sight, it will move out. It will go away. And so that's actually the very deep understanding why vanaprastha is important, because Krishna explains that we have to remember him at the time of death. And where do we remember him? In the mind. So we have to completely free the mind in order that he can take over there. And so when one takes vanaprastha, then one can engage fully in Krishna consciousness. And if you look again at the instructions of the 4 Kumaras, they are very, very clear, There is no room for speculation. They say full focus, you have to make full focus on the goal, and that's how we attain. Prabhupada said, look at me. Prabhupada took vanaprastha. And what I find nice about Prabhupada is that he was actually afraid of that step. And that is so human. That vanaprastha is not an easy thing, sannyasa is not an easy thing. And he was lamenting, but he was doing it anyway. Because and I think he was also showing us the example that, hey, look at me, it's not easy, but we all have to do it. So I want to, we have a few minutes before 45, but I really would like to read it to you, because for me, that was kind of an eye-opener in terms of Varnashram Dharma, to understand a little bit what Prabhupada actually wanted. And one thing also, when you read the purport, if you're a little bit open, you will think, how is Prabhupada, on one hand he's saying these books are the law books for the next 10,000 years. And then he's so clear about the culture, he doesn't give any room. Yesterday we speak, Lucas, how he doesn't give any room in the books. That's the Vedic culture, that's supposed to be done, so you do it, basically. And now also hearing this, I think Prabhupada had a very, very big vision. We know that for the whole world. And as followers, I think we should also try to understand the vision and assist him by establishing the vision. So here, that is a conversation in 1977. It's a famous one. It's called "The Varnashram System Must Be Introduced." And it's a conversation between Prabhupada and Satsvarup. So Satsvarup says to Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya, it is in Mayapur. Lord Chaitanya, when Ramananda Rai brought this up, he said it was not possible in his age to introduce this. Famous now, we hear this often in the class. And Prabhupada said, yes, he did not say possible. Eho Bhaya. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was interested only on the spiritual platform. He had no idea of material side. He rejected material side. So that is the first important point to understand. Those devotees who use that argument to say Varnashram Dharma shouldn't be implemented, Prabhupada says, no, that is not true. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't say. He said he was not interested in that. But he didn't say you shouldn't live according to Varnashram Dharma. And Satsvarup says, but don't we do that also? Prabhupada says, no, our position is different. We are trying to implement Krishna consciousness in everything. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally took sannyas. He rejected completely material, nishkinchana. But we are not going to be nishkinchana. We are trying to cement the troubled position of that. That is also in the prescription of Bhagavad Gita. We are not rejecting the whole society. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejected everything. Iha bhaya. Rejected meaning, I do not take much interest in this. Bhaya. It is external. He was simply interested in the internal, the spiritual. But our duty is that we shall arrange the external affairs all so nicely that one day they will come to the spiritual platform very easily, paving the way. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, personality like that, they have nothing to do with this material world. But we are preaching. We are preaching. Therefore we must pave the situation in such a way that gradually they will be promoted to the spiritual plane, which is not required. Then Satsvarup, Varnashram is not required. Prabhupada, not required. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu denied, I am not Brahmana, I am not Kshatriya, I am not this, I am not that. He rejected. But in the Bhagavad Gita, the Chatur Varnyam Maya Srishtam, so we are Krishna, preaching Krishna consciousness. It must be done. But in Chaitanya, Harisori comes in now. But in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's practical preaching, he only introduced them to chant, Prabhupada. That is not possible for ordinary men. Harisori. What? To simply induce people to chant? Prabhupada. Harisori. He only introduced just the chanting. Prabhupada. But who will chant? Who will chant? Satsvarup. But if they won't chant, then neither will they train up in the Varnashram. That's the easiest. Prabhupada. The chanting will be there, but you cannot expect that people will chant like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They cannot even chant 16 rounds, these rascals. They are going to be Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Satsvarup. No, but if they at least will chant and take some prasad. Prabhupada. Chanting will go on, that is not stopped. But at the same time, the Varnashram Dharma must be established to make the easy way. Harisori. Well, at least my own understanding was that the chanting was introduced in the age of Kali because Varnashram is not possible. Prabhupada. Because it will cleanse the mind, chanting will not stop. Harishori. So therefore the chanting was introduced to replace all of the systems of Varnashram and like that. Prabhupada. Yes, it can replace, but who is going to replace it? the people are not so advanced. If you imitate Haridas Thakur to chant, it is not possible. Satsvarup. We tell them, go on with your job, but chant also. So Prabhupada goes on, and one thing I just want to read, I scroll a little bit down. One interesting thing he says here, so the Varnashram system is like for the Kanishtas, Kanishtadikari. And Prabhupada, Kanishta? When one is, Harishori, when one is only on the platform of neophyte, Prabhupada, yes, Kanishtadikari, yes. Harishori, Varnashram system is beneficial. And Prabhupada, Kanishtadikari means he must be a Brahmana. That is Kanishtadikari. This conversation is quite long, and just looking for this place where Prabhupada makes another interesting statement. And at one point Prabhupada becomes also quite upset because Satsvarup does not understand him. Sorry, I cannot find it now. Anyway, I just give you a hint, and hopefully I will find it later. I will send it in the chat. Prabhupada, it's not clear for Satsvarup. What does it mean on one hand that devotees shouldn't, on the other hand there should be Varnashram, and then Prabhupada says it is like a role play. The devotees are advanced enough, they have to do like a role play. They have to show it by example, like a role play to the innocent public. That's what he says. And I mean, coming back to the initial point, Maharaj Prithu doesn't have to do it, but he's doing it like a role play to show to the world. So that's maybe a point I wanted to bring across today, that sometimes we hear, we are devotees and we are not this body, and let us just act on the platform of the soul. Even if that is the case, which mostly is not the case, we are mostly still on the material platform, still we should do it. We should still follow and show the example. Hare Krishna. So thank you for your attention, and I don't know, Krishna Prem Prabhu, if you want to add something, or somebody else, Krishna Prabhu, if there's any disagreements, or you want to add something to the Varnashram.
Many very wonderful points. Maybe this is coming out of my self-defense, because I did divorce. But let's see, maybe that's something relevant to discussion. When these certain things which are not, let's say, spiritual, established, was that devotee is just absorbing Krishna and he's happy and satisfied and he's detached automatically and he doesn't need those things. But because we are not on that platform, then we need a certain structure to come to that platform. Now, in a marriage, there's certain also constituents which need to be there. And due to Kali Yuga, I think a lot of these constituents are not there. There's a certain ingredients, and then if you have those ingredients in a good enough ratio, you can actually pull it through, and you can be exemplary. But if you don't, I think there are certain instances, and I'm not advocating divorce. I would be advocating more, take your time, know what are the constituents of a healthy marriage, what should be expected, maybe what are your shortcomings, what you would need to work on, and then enter it with a good thought and a good guidance. I felt I didn't have that. So when I entered it, I find myself, I was not actually receiving the necessary necessary elements to push it through. So I needed to get out. To do the job again, yes, like you said. It's, you don't complete it. But to do the job, you need certain, to go out in Sankirtan, you need have taken prasad, you need read your books, you need had sufficient rest. Then you get the job done. If you don't have those ingredients, well, maybe 1 or 2 days you can do it, but then you crash. So same way, I think it's not just about the marriage. I think the whole Varnashram system, there's many things, yes, we need to do this, yes, we cannot do this, yes, but there's also background of other ingredients and other constituents which we need to consider. Are they there? Is the devotee having sufficient health? Is the devotee having sufficient, I don't know, like that. I just wanted to bring that awareness that there's other constituents which need to be looked at. It's not just black and white. Do it or not do it. Just because you couldn't push it through, that means you were not sincere enough. Maybe there were some other reasons which were there to consider. Defense.
I say something to my defense. Okay, so you're saying that I mentioned how when there is divorce, it means the mission is not completed of Grihastashram, and then the whole purpose of Grihastashram means to get purified in order to come to the next stage of renouncing that. And yeah, you're saying how maybe one was sincere, but still divorce came, and maybe so many things were not in place, and that there is a background to it. I just made the point that when you divorce means that Grihastashram is not over. That was my point. I'm not saying, I would never tell somebody do divorce or do not divorce. That's not my position. I just try to say what I think Prabhupada said, and he said because he wants to give us the complete understanding, because eventually we have to deal with with the consequences of our activities. But then how it is done in the situation, I'm definitely not the man to judge that. And one thing that comes to my mind, marriage starts so much before, no? Like the brahmacharya ashram. Most of us, we didn't have that. And then also how we enter marriage there's a whole system. I was just reading Prabhupada's quote. He said, I find it very interesting. He says, you have to find a wife with a similar disposition, something, maybe different words he's using, and maybe he's using different words, but then he's saying not because of beauty and like that, something else. So he made the point several times that actually the main compatibility is on the platform of the mind, that you have a similar, a like-mindedness actually.
You would say landscape.
Thanks, babe. Yeah, that's
in the mind.
but we know that we are brought up completely differently. At least you will look the externals first.
Yeah.
But that means it will create problem later on, naturally. Because your intention is to enjoy this external thing, and then it will end up with another thing. Yeah, so I want to just, for my defense, say I know it's much more complex, but my point was that the system is scientific, and in order to move forward, we have to go through it properly. And if we don't do it, we will actually, the reactions will be here, and we are responsible for it also. But that doesn't mean that we condemn anyone.
Yeah, it was, thank you. Yeah, very nice. I'm just reading Srila Prabhupada Amrita, and Srila Prabhupada is being married to, how old was the lady? I think maybe 12 years old or something. And he was studying in a college. And they don't live together. She's just coming and bringing prasad. And that's their exchange for many years. For many years. It's a total different planet. And beautiful. It's beautiful because that the lady doesn't need to worry. I mean, how much worry men or lady have about their future partner? It's like incredible. There's so much energy invested and so much fear. Will it work? Will it not? Will I be cheated? Will I not? There's so many these online dating platforms now. Because that's a need. It's a great need to have a relationship, deep relationship. So yes, and in that culture where he was coming, it was accomplished in a very nice way. That the parents were already thinking about it. Actually, Prabhupada's mother, because they had 3 daughters as well, and their one daughter was, I think, 12 or something. She said to the Gaur Mohan, if you don't get her married, I'm going to go commit suicide.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
I would just like to add to make the picture more beautiful. The most beautiful thing I find we see in this verse, how now Prithviraj and his wife live together for the forest, and I never understood, forest, but if I'm in India, I told somebody in Mayapur I had to go somewhere. It was raining and it was dark. I had to go through the forest, really through the forest, and I was just so scared, that there is a snake or anything, and then I was realizing going to the forest is serious stuff. Living here we don't have wild animals, but there it's and a woman who, please don't get me wrong, but the system is the woman, the man is meant for renunciation, the woman less. That's just the nature how it is. Not good or bad, it's just how it is. But by following the system, the woman becomes so attached to the husband, and the husband is so dutiful that he will take his wife and she will attain the same perfection. She will get the same benefit. Means she can renounce everything as well. This is beautiful, no? If that system is not there, it would be impossible to renounce. For him, but especially also for the woman, because a woman usually doesn't have the tendency to renounce. But even in this situation, even she can renounce. And the same result for both. It's even said, Prabhupada mentions, it's interesting how he said, Prithviraj goes alone to the forest with his wife. He goes alone to the forest with his wife. And he explains because it's actually one. That's why he's alone. It's not somebody else, but so beautiful culture.
Just to glorify the ladies, I mean just to nicely devoted to Krishna, that the husband is the one who is achieving higher destination because of the wife. Sometimes they're more fixed, deity worship, and by the age they come and they're really, we have these examples in ISKCON.
Again, I just said renunciation. I didn't say devoted, I said renunciation. Just want to clarify because sometimes I feel that's why I said it's not good or bad, it's just renunciation. Men have more capacity and women have less, that's it. But renunciation is not bhakti. But it's needed to go back home back to God. But maybe Prithu Maharaj became so devoted, he got some other qualities from his wife. So it's a nice an exchange. Hare Krishna. So thank you very much, and then have a nice festival today. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Damodar Prasad Dasa ki jai.
I apologize those who wanted to ask more questions. I hogged the microphone.
Today's this.
Sie kommt.
Heute? Sie kommt?
Ja, sie kommt.
Welche
Ich
Zeit?
weiß nicht genau wann, aber die kommt.
Vielleicht kann ich dir sonst, ich bleibe nicht so wahnsinnig lang, ich bleibe zum Frühstück dann noch ein bisschen selber und bin ich wieder, vielleicht kann ich dir das sehen. Weil ich wollte ja was in der Fracht
Ich denke,
holen.
ich sehe sie nicht.
Also,
Aber ich muss noch
also
probieren und
ist nicht so super.
ja, ich sehe das. Also, und ich gehe nachher auch nicht nach Hause.
Ja, easy. Ich dachte nur. Vielleicht sehe ich sie noch.
Aber sie kommt und auch morgen wird sie da sein.
Ah ja, gut. Das ist
Ja.
Danke dir. Hey, hallo. Did you see that? Huh? Too big, is it? Catches my attention immediately.
jetzt auch mit dem Auto?
Ja,
Seid ihr schon voll?
ich glaube schon.
Okay.
Also ich muss jetzt gerade mal checken, hat jemand geschrieben, Rita. Ich weiß nicht, wer das ist. Oh, can you tell me who Rita is?
Rita, yes, the lady sitting
Oh,
at
the
the
one who
back.
sat next. Okay. Ja, und ich habe kleines Auto, mein Auto ist
Ah,
noch für 4 Leute zu
Ich habe
viel.
so geplant, zum Zug zu gehen. Ich habe
Ah,
gedacht,
okay.
weil ich bin auch bis etwa um 1:30 bin ich noch hier und dann kann ich jetzt nachher gehen.
Also wir gehen auch ein bisschen später. Ich habe eigentlich mit Ananta Station abgemacht und er arbeitet irgendwie bis 1.